Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. This is...
Baseball's famous street
hello.
That's got us all aglow.
Didn't remember.
He's just a
Remember this song?
I think it's time to fire the engineer.
Joe DiMaggio.
Why are we playing this? This is very interesting.
Yeah.
You heard that before, David?
I've
Cohen?
heard that. Yes,
You have.
definitely.
That's a song back from the 40s and 50s. I think it was the 50s, actually. But anyway, we're here with the I'll call him the Everything Old is New Again Clipper himself, David Cohen.
Oh, thank you.
How
wow.
about that?
That's a high honor.
Why do I even talk about Clipper, and why we listen to Joe DiMaggio's song? What was it about?
Well, it was about Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee great. And we have a special guest with us right here in the studio today, Doug.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you're going to talk classic baseball in New York, or really in this country, let's face it, right? You got to start with Ruth and Gehrig, which is a big fan of mine. We'll get. I'm a big fan of them. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But before we talk about that, you've got to then take the next step to Joe DiMaggio. And, of course, there's Mickey Mantle after that, which, he's a little more contemporary, so people, know that. But your grandfather, if you asked your grandfather or grandmother who was their big, best favorite, most popular player of the day, it's got to be Joe DiMaggio. And with that, he brought like an ambiance. He married Marilyn Monroe. He had a pop culture following. He was, after he retired, his legacy continued, as we know, right? And it wasn't just at the Yankee Old Timers games. Right. So anyway, who is our guest this week? I think everybody knows who Joe DiMaggio is, but who's John Positano?
John Positano is here with us in the studio, and just to give you a little background before we say hello to John, he is a co-author of a book that came out. It's called Dinner with DiMaggio, and together John and his brother, Dr. Rock Positano, through the book, talks of Dr. Positano's firsthand experience as a close personal friend of Joe DiMaggio, and talks about conversations they had over dinner and throughout Joe's later years. So welcome, John.
And thanks, and thank you also for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Listen, this is a book that, there's been tons of books written about DiMaggio, and this one is different because this, I believe, gives you a real inside position at the table, at the dinner table. If you were going to have dinner with Joe D, what would he talk about? What would he eat? What would he drink? And we'll get into all of that. But right now, I want to just define, like, you have a brother who is the gentleman that became very close friends with Joe DiMaggio in Joe's later years, correct?
Yes.
And your brother's name, and how did he get that relationship started?
Well, basically speaking, Rock knew a fellow down by the New York Daily News, Bill Gallo. Bill Gallo was an icon in and of his own stead. And Bill Gallo said to Rock, he said, I have a friend of mine who has a problem with his foot. So Rock says, okay, I'll look at him. I have a problem. What is this fellow's name? So Bill Gallo said, well, the fellow's name is, and then, of course, he mentions the name. So Rock says, really? I said, well, it would be great to see this fellow, and I'm great to help him because he has a famous heel spur. And what happened was, a little while later, Rock dropped off a business card in the lobby of Joe's place. And that same night, Joe stopped by and in a very formal way said, listen, I am a good friend of Bill's, and Bill says you can help me with my heel spur. So Rock was, of course, thrilled. I said, of course I can help you with this. And they had a friendship that went for about 8 or 9 years. The first year or so was simply in the medical field. And Rocky actually cured his heel spur.
Wow.
Right.
Which, as you know, hobbled him for the longest time.
Yes. So Joe D, if you didn't know, he was hobbled by this later in his career, and he played through it. But I don't know. Would you say it may have been part of the reason that he let go after 13 years, really 16 years of his lifetime where he was a baseball player. 3 of them, unfortunately or unfortunately, were swallowed up by World War II.
True.
So, that was his prime years, so he missed that. So he played only 13 years. But I think what's interesting to see is that, first of all, an all-star for 13 years. 9 of the 13 years, he was a World Series champion. The only guy that comes to light in that way, to me, is a Derek Jeter, and that's like DiMaggio light. But, I mean, Jeter was the same kind. Like, maybe not and DiMaggio had tremendous stats, don't get me wrong, but the idea is went beyond the stats, this guy. He had the ability to inspire his teammates and, or at the very least, lead a team himself to victory over and over and over again. So after that, now he's got this heel issue, and imagine if he had met your brother, and if your brother was around, back in the day to resolve that problem, then maybe he would have stuck around a little longer. I don't know. Does that make sense?
He actually said if he knew Rock, and Rock was in the field at that time, it would have been adding 3 or 4 years to his playing. Because the last few years he was playing, he was hobbled by pain so much that he really couldn't do everything he needed to be doing.
Right, and in his later years, Rock, and you define this in the book, ran into Phil Rizzuto on the streets of New York, and Rock was his confidant, and now DiMaggio's confidant for those, let's call it 10 years, a little less, right? And said to Phil, who was a teammate of DiMaggio's, and of course the voice of the Yankees for so many years, hey, let's go to dinner. And Rizzuto, and they meant, of course, to go to dinner with DiMaggio as well as Rock, and Rizzuto turned him down. Question is, was that a result of privacy? Was that a result of respect? Was that a result of fear? Was it a result of awe on behalf of Rizzuto? Combination of all those? Or why wouldn't he want to sit down and have dinner with DiMaggio?
Because it was out of fear, it was out of awe. He actually told Rocky, you're able to eat with him, and I would not even think of literally asking him to be eating out. This is your world, Rock. It's not mine. And literally, Phil said, "Listen, thanks very much, but I could never do it."
Holy cow! I can't eat with Joltin' Joe.
Absolutely.
Not even some cannolis.
Total fear.
How do you like that?
Total awe.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a very valid point. Joe was the leader for the World Series and the Yankee leader from game to game in each season, which he happened to play with the Yankees. That's why I think he, in some ways, was a lone figure for the Yankees, because as you and I know, a leader always has out his arms, so as to speak. He doesn't want to be totally comfortable with the people he is leading, because that's usually fatal.
Right. It's almost like when you have those baseball players like, let's just say, Berra, who was a successful manager, but still a fellow like Berra that took over the Yankees, I think it was 1964, and was sort of friendly with many of the players. How do you then have authority? It's a difficult thing to do.
Well,
and then tell your buddy, hey,
it's one
be
style.
quiet. I'm talking right now. No, I mean, that's the kind of a thing, right? I mean, how would that happen if I was the boss of you, David Cohen? It wouldn't work. It doesn't make sense.
Well, it doesn't work for everyone. I mean, some managerial styles are the exact opposite, and it works for them. But
if
for
you
Joe,
know,
it didn't work.
Right. But if you know the players and you were sort of friendly with them, how do you then put the hat on and say, no, you're sitting this game?
Girardi does it now.
That's
for the
true.
Yankees.
And Girardi did it with Posada, and Posada wasn't too happy about it. Does that make sense? Yes. Hello?
Yeah, but he wasn't happy about it. But he still
Exactly.
managed.
It's
the
not
way.
easy.
But again, this is not about Joe Girardi. My only point is that I think Joe DiMaggio led the way that he believed a leader should lead, and it worked for him, and it worked for the team.
Right, and we'll be back right after this, and Everything Old is New again, talking about DiMaggio, and the book is Dinner with DiMaggio. Look that up; you'll enjoy it.
Baseball's Hall of Fame. He got there blow by blow.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
With the bases loaded with Yankees, Hubble faces Joe DiMaggio, year's home run king. And Joe singles into center field, bringing in Gomez and Crossetti with 2 Yankee runs and putting the Yanks ahead in the ball game.
There we go. That's Everything Old is New Again's interpretation, and listening to the World Series 1937. Of course, all of us are interested in not only that, but Joe DiMaggio. We're here having sort of a pseudo dinner with DiMaggio with John Positano, who wrote a book with his brother, Dr. Rock Positano. And again, dinner with DiMaggio. They explain maybe the last 9 years relationship between John's brother and Joe DiMaggio, and how he was able to break through that facade, that wall that I think we have an impression that Joe DiMaggio had around him as the general public looking to Joe, especially in his later years, and to really see the inner workings of this complicated man. Before we get to the man himself, let's talk about him as a player. I'm just going to throw you he's 13 years now is all he played, and that sounds like a lot, but it's kind of not a lot for the era. Think about it. Ted Williams played until 1967, and was basically a contemporary of Joe D. And Joe finished in 51. So I know Ted Williams a little younger, but still, Joe, if he didn't have this injury, and if World War II didn't take 3 prime years away, probably would have had another 7 years altogether at least. But anyway, based on that, his averages, if you said, I'm going to have this player on my team, would you take him? He's got this is now his average of his career. 325 average, slugging percentage 579. He'll average you 28 homers a year, 118 RBIs, and 30 doubles a year. Those are good and two great stats in our era today. Maybe the home run hitters hit more, but certainly not for that average. But they sound like good numbers. They don't sound like numbers. Oh, maybe I'm wrong, Dave. What do you think? Do they sound like numbers like, oh my, this is the greatest in the world?
Well, I mean, they sound like Hall of Fame eligible numbers.
Correct,
sure.
But do they carry the aura of the personality? In other words, if you just heard the numbers and not knew who was the person behind those numbers, do you think you would say, wow, this is the greatest guy ever played?
No, right.
But he had that what am I saying? He had that aura in his era. That would be the way to say it. In that 13 years, 9 World Series.
He didn't make any errors either.
And he didn't make many errors. He was an outfield. When I see him on film, and when you hear contemporaries, my grandfather, for example, who saw him play, would say, this guy is gliding out there in the outfield like what would they say, like a swan or something very regal to get to. He never looked like he was going to dive for a ball. He was always there. Does that make any sense?
Yes, he was to our eyes a flawless player. He had a certain grace which I don't think you've seen in any other player since. Certainly not since any other player since.
Right. And again, I think the only one that comes, maybe I'm wrong, you tell me, I said it before, but a Jeter light, where he carried himself without any controversy in his career, played a tremendous career. His numbers on the face don't look like they're the greatest in the world, although he's got 3,000 hits. I mean, that's amazing. So let's not put him down. But again, from the stats alone, Jeter doesn't seem to be the greatest player of his era. But I would argue with you, we're going to look back at Jeter's era and say, to some small degree, he's DiMaggio-esque in that he carried himself during his career that way.
True.
I don't know what's going to happen after the career now, if he's going to have that aura. He's trying to buy a baseball team and all this. I don't know.
Probably won't.
Right. And so DiMaggio, now let's talk about the aura after the career. Well, actually, when did he marry Marilyn Monroe? Was it during his career?
Yes.
All right. So he even had that going for him. But now explain a little bit about the thought process of DiMaggio marrying someone that seems to be the opposite personality of Joe D, this gregarious woman who's the envy of everybody in the day, and Joe D's got her on his arm. Was it just the looks, or was it more for Joe?
I believe it was physical love.
Okay.
I think she was so good to look at that he fell in love. The marriage did not last terribly long.
Right.
I have read other books on the same topic, and there are actually books on this same topic. He did not fully understand her. Right. I think it's partially because she had a mental illness problem of some type. So I think that was part of the problem here. He fell in love with the physical woman. I don't think, as a lot of the other people who have written books on this topic, I don't think he married her to keep her home, to make pasta and meat balls. I think he knew she was a starlet. I think he liked the notion, though this isn't written, that she made a lot of money. He understood the movie field, which is something which hopefully was brought out right in the book. And I think he liked the concept of being with her and making money with her too, and just going places. But I don't think he was expecting her to stay home. And I think, as we cover in the book, and this comes from his own words, Joe wanted to have kids. Mm-hmm. He more or less thought sex was all about kids. He thought that great sex was having great kids. And basically speaking, from what I've read and from what I heard about him, he thought Marilyn could give him kids, but for various reasons she wasn't able to.
Right. Now, so what went wrong? There was Sinatra involved a little bit there, and I think he blamed Sinatra in some way. What do you feel did, at least let's put it from Joe DiMaggio's perspective, went wrong with the relationship with this young lady?
Basically speaking, and this is covered very clearly in a lot of the overseas press, the European press, Marilyn was brought to the Kennedy family, Kennedy clan, as we call them in the book, and for a variety of reasons, Joe blamed Frank for bringing her to see the Kennedys. And basically, I don't know. We are only able to read about what happened in that era, not like we know now the last 8 or 9 years of his life, and we know that very well. But probably there was a problem there with Marilyn being on the garrulous side, maybe mentioning names she shouldn't have mentioned, and for a variety of reasons, she didn't reach a happy ending.
Right.
And I know Joe thought it was Frank and also the Kennedy family, because that's what he actually said. I don't know if that's true.
Right.
I don't know where he found that out from. I don't know, it was just a figment of his own mind, but he was a sharp guy.
Well, we also have heard, again, this is now innuendo, but from DiMaggio himself, who lived there and was married to her, we heard, and later on we've heard that there may have been some shenanigans with the Kennedy boys, and to be disrespectful to them and saying they're boys. I mean, the President of the United States, the gentleman that ran for President of the United States and was assassinated, his brother, well, both were assassinated horribly, but on the other side, when they were at the top of their game, they were attractive and attracted to starlets, and Marilyn was certainly one of them, and may have been involved. So there's a little bit of possible reason to infidelity and so forth, I guess.
And I think what must be thought of as you read this book is that Joe was no one's fool.
Right.
Joe knew people. He definitely knew, and I've read this in other books, J. Edgar Hoover. And he knew a lot of the gossip columnists of his time. He also knew mob guys. And somehow he got the information that there was some problems with Frank, problems with the Kennedy family.
Right.
I don't know if what he heard was so or was just lies, but he definitely thought so.
But also think about it, we're running short on this segment, but I just want to say, think about Joe D. in the day. He was as popular in the day when he was married to Marilyn Monroe as Marilyn Monroe. I mean, he was baseball. Certainly there were other players, but if you talked about baseball in the 40s, and late 30s, it was Joe D. And let's face it, baseball was a lot more popular, I think you could say, than it is today. And it was part of the American lexicon, and therefore so was he, for sure. Anyway, we'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again. Continue some discussion about Joe D. with John Positano. Dinner with DiMaggio. Go out and get it. It's good stuff. Everything Old is New Again.
Just a man and not a freak.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
This is an intimate moment we recorded at Penn Station. Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle.
Well, Mickey, this is another season for me. Of course, this is your first season here in the major leagues. How do you feel about this first trip or the first game you're going to play?
Well, Joe, I'm pretty nervous about it all, and it's all really new to me, I'll tell you.
Well, I'll tell you, Mickey, I felt pretty nervous the first game. When I did play my first game, I swung at the first pitch and was very fortunate to get a base hit, and that took all the tension out. Now, are you going to do the same thing for us?
I don't know. I'll probably swing at the first pitch no matter where they throw it. I don't know whether I'll get a hit.
I hope it's a hit, Mickey.
There we go. It's that's DiMaggio and Mantle having apparently.
Did they know they were on the air?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it sounded like such a candid conversation.
It's not necessarily an off-the-cuff discussion, but they presented it that way, and we're here on Everything Old is New Again with the Clipper himself, David Cohen, our standard bearer, just as Joe D was the standard bearer of baseball for so many years, including the years he played and thereafter. And we're with the co-author of Dinner with DiMaggio, Memories of an American Hero, with John Positano, and he's talking about Dr. Rock Positano, which is his brother, had a tremendous relationship with Joe D. When Joe D would come to New York, he lived in Florida as well, and when he would come to New York, eventually, your brother was the man for quite a number of years that was basically his tour guide, his confidant, and his inner circle would make the reservations for dinner and have dinner with Joe D. And so he developed a relationship that I don't think we could say he had, DiMaggio had, with Mantle. So maybe you can go in a little smidge about the relationship he had, and a somewhat adversarial or at least standoffish relationship with the rookie Mickey Mantle. Let's just dive into that a little bit.
Well, first, Mickey was my hero when I was growing up.
Oh, let me interrupt you. I'm sorry. I think it's interesting for the listeners to hear that when your brother first met Joe D., he's meeting Joe DiMaggio. Again, you got to place this fellow where he is.
Yes.
He's in a huge player, and then a huge representative of baseball and an icon. And Joe D asks him who's his favorite player, and he says
Mickey Mantle, of course.
Right to Joe D's face. So anyway, from there.
Well, let me put it to this way. He was obviously a little mad that Rock said Mickey Mantle, but we liked Mickey Mantle. We used to follow him very closely. Once we even got to see him even play, and he wasn't the best player on that day. Basically speaking, Joe was on the vicious side with Mickey Mantle. That's the only way to put it. I'm not sure everyone would say that. But even when Mickey was dying, Joe wouldn't say anything about it. A lot of the press calls would go to Rocky, and Rocky said, okay, I will certainly ask him for some comment about this friend of his, or at least a teammate of his, dying. It'd be nice to get some comment. And Joe was adamant. He said, I'm not saying anything.
Why was that?
I don't know. Even Rocky to this day says, I don't know why he was so difficult on that point.
Well, Rocky does infer, and you infer in the book a little bit about that. I'm going to just take your words, because I remember this, and he said, now this is DiMaggio, said to Casey Stengel, who said to DiMaggio, listen, show Mantle the ropes here, show him, teach him, because remember, Mantle was a shortstop, so he's converted to playing center field in 1951. He was saying, listen, show this guy the ropes how to play center, and DiMaggio's like, I'm going to show this character how to play center to take over my position. And by the way, and when he did take over the position, Mantle, he was there longer, better stats. And the career's over. Maybe there's a little of that, to go along with it. I'm just inferring. But finally, think about DiMaggio's point of view is like, I told Mickey to play it straight.
True.
Stay off the booze and the women and so forth. Play it straight. You get involved with your career. Be devoted to your career, in paraphrasing, and you'll have a great career. If you don't, you're going to go down the tubes. And the advice was not listened to.
Basically, he was telling Mickey, if you don't follow the rules, stay away from the women, stay away from the booze, and stay away from partying out every night. You'll be fine. Otherwise, you'll be all washed up.
Right. And so there's a lot of elements that I can understand on Joe D's point of view. He didn't listen to me. He's my replacement. He did better than me. He could have done better than that. I have this injury that took me out of the play. I had to go to World War II for 3 years. My stats are less. I'm still revered, but here's my competition right here, if that makes sense. And here's my buddy, who even him is saying, because he didn't see DiMaggio play, that Mantle's his favorite.
Well, we more or less thought that obviously Mickey was there to be getting rid of him, but by the same measure, he seemed to have gone a little bit overboard. He was quite vicious towards the very end, and I don't think that made him look all that good.
Well, in addition to that, though, if you remember, you may not remember this, but Mickey was in right field in the first year of 51, and DiMaggio was in center, and there was a ball that they were both going to be going for to catch. It was supposedly was really the right fielder's ball, but Mickey was in so much awe of DiMaggio that he stopped short when he saw DiMaggio out of the corner of his eye, and that caused him the injury to his knees that he lived with for the rest of his career. And he had not had that injury, he could have played better and longer, besides the booze, as well. So think about that. And so DiMaggio had that effect on him. I wonder if he felt guilty about that at all. Did they ever talk about that? I didn't see that.
I don't think Rock has any notes about that. I don't think they ever talked about that.
Well, so we can add that to the Everything Old is New Again portion of this book. When it goes to softcover, you can put my little 2 cents in there. And here's my 2 cents on the prior show talking about somebody else.
He would be a hard to interview. He's a real scotch. Yeah. But he really is. But,
is that an Italian?
But he's a fascinating guy because you can't, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Am I wrong? Can you not help but admire that guy's enthusiasm for what he did for a living?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, that's me talking about, not Joe D, but Joe D did comment upon Pete Rose. And that's my comment about that scotch. David loves when I use that word. DiMaggio had some comments, I think, about Pete Rose that's interesting to talk about.
Stunning comments.
Yeah.
Remember, Joe was a straight guy. He was an arrow. He didn't believe in gambling. He didn't believe in doing anything screwy in that sense. Pete Rose was meshed in a lot of problems. He meshed in tax problems. He was meshed in being involved with all kinds of gamblers. And Rocky once asked him about that. He said, listen, this Pete Rose, he was involved with gamblers, and he wasn't paying his income taxes and this, that. And of course, he was barred, I think, from the Hall of Fame, the Baseball Hall of Fame. And actually, Joe was very nice. He said, Pete Rose did a lot for this sport. Pete Rose was a hustler. Pete Rose played so many games. Pete Rose poured out his heart for this. And I think he would have said, listen, let's bring in Pete Rose for the Hall of Fame, saying at the same time, listen, you can't be involved with gamblers. You can't be involved with, we're not paying your income taxes. He more or less said he would have put Rose in the Hall of Fame, and that stunned Rocky because Joe was such a straight arrow.
Well, think also about Pete Rose. I think it was a 46-game hitting streak he had back in the late 70s.
That's right.
And so he came close to DiMaggio's record. I wonder, this is just such a proposition, but what if DiMaggio saw Pete Rose break his record? If he would have had the same opinion, I think it would have been a stronger opinion.
I think he liked Pete Rose.
Yeah.
That's what I really think.
That's where I'm at. I love to hate that guy because I was a Met fan back in the day. But you couldn't help but respect what he did, and the admiration that doesn't end because he did what he did. He was on the field, hit 4,000 hits. This guy's something else.
Actually, if he was given the same chance, probably Joe would have had a court of some time, just of ball players, to say, should we admit this fella into the Hall of Fame? And I think that would have helped out Rose and would have helped out the league much more than a media circus.
Right. And we're talking about Joe DiMaggio and having Dinner with DiMaggio in some way, secondhand here, through the co-author of Dinner with DiMaggio, Memories of an American Hero, Dr. Rock Positano and John Positano. John is with us today on Everything Old is New Again. We're going to come back and dive into a little bit more about the cultural influence that Joe D had even to our day. Everything Old is New Again.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
I saw DiMaggio in the donut shop again. Yeah.
Joe DiMaggio?
Joe DiMaggio. This time I went in and I sat down across from him and I really watched him. I studied his every move. For example, he dunks.
Joe DiMaggio dunks his donut?
That's right. See, now I know it's not him. Joe DiMaggio could not be a dunker. Oh, he's a dunker.
There we go, and everything old is new again. Taking a look at Joe DiMaggio through the eyes of Seinfeld. I'm sure we'll get a phone call from them playing that clip against their better wishes. I don't know, but bottom line is that just shows you in the 90s. Now he's retired. Let's see, 50, 60, 70, 40 years later, 40 plus years later, and Joe D is being presented in the #1 comedy and television show of the era as a prominent figure and respected so much. Why, 40 years later, is he still respected like that? And by the way, did he dunk?
He did not dunk, but what he would do is something a little odd. He would have a half cup of decaf coffee and a half cup, and it had to be exactly a half cup of hot water, and he would mix, just like a chemist, the coffee he wanted to have. So in one way, I don't know if Seinfeld ever saw this fellow having coffee out. He may have. And while he did not dunk, he would look at that coffee for the longest time, and it would seem like there was something wrong, but he would mix the coffee just precisely, and that's how he was. He was a precise guy.
And that was your brother's way of telling when he met someone and someone said, yeah, I had coffee with DiMaggio. He'd ask him, what did he have?
Was full of it.
He was full of it if he didn't mention what you just said.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, is David full of it? I don't know. You have a story about Joe D that you saw in
I do.
New York City.
I was at Venero's, which is an old Italian bakery on the Lower East Village in Manhattan, and I was there with my wife, then my girlfriend, and her parents. And my future father-in-law, taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Okay, do not look to the right, but to your right is Joe DiMaggio." And I was like, okay, so now how do I turn my head where it's not obvious?
Slowly,
exactly, very slowly. And there he was, and he was sitting there. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing him. And he was there with two younger guys. I don't know. Joe was very old at the time. Yeah. Very old.
But it may have been with Rock for all we know.
It could have been.
It may have been.
Yeah.
Could have been him. That's right. Fortunately, I wasn't at the angle where I could just stare at him straight ahead, because that's exactly what I would have done. So I just kind of turned to the right and sneak some glances over his way. But it's still one of the greatest celebrity sightings.
Why? Now that's again, I have to ask. You never saw this guy play. You barely saw Mantle. I don't think you ever even saw Mantle play.
I never saw Mantle.
Why, 45 years later, whatever this was, from this fellow's career, removed? You never saw him even play. Why was he so much of carry so much gravitas for you to care that much?
Well, because to me back then it was this pantheon of these Yankee legends that seemed like gods to me, and I would never have a chance to ever meet, but always heard amazing stories about them. Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, right? And here was one of them that I never in my lifetime thought I'd ever actually see in person. So for that reason alone, and also being a Yankee fan, but for that reason mostly, I was just blown away. We all were. We were just totally blown away that we were actually seeing him. So I knew enough not to go up to him either. I knew enough about him that you do not do that with him.
Right.
So.
There was one guy that got away with it. He went into a restaurant. It was in your book, and it just comes to mind where I think it was something like this fellow brought this huge statue to the table where Rock was sitting with Joe D, and it presented that as an award to Joe DiMaggio, and that was maybe one of the only times that Joe actually said, "Hey, that's funny. That's okay. I'll talk to you." Other than that, he didn't really want to be bothered.
He didn't like it.
Yeah. So there's little stories like that in the book that I love. And let's just look at the baseball side of Joe D, because let's face it, that's what he was, baseball
They were
player.
talking about Bill Dickey's theory of hitting and lining the knuckles up, that was the single most important thing to Dickey when he was the hitting coach on the New York Yankees. Today, that's almost passé. They don't even think about that.
Well, that's the way I batted anyhow. I had the knuckles lined up. I'd have to go along with the theory, and I did exactly that way Paul Wainer hit. He hit down on the ball. I hit it entirely different. I was more of a line drive hitter.
Now, there you go. That's Joe D. On a rain delay with the legendary John Henderson in Philadelphia in the 1980s. And he stopped in the booth and gave much longer interview than that. But he spoke about him. You have to be a baseball player, but, certain hitting techniques. And I thought it was interesting that Joe D., I wonder, would he have made a good hitting coach. And your brother would know that because your brother was in the cages in Coney Island when Joe D was, I guess, in the late 70s or mid 70s, right? It was age-wise.
Yes,
and tried
age-wise.
to. Your brother was hitting the ball and he thought he was doing well, and Joe D had a comment or two and messed them all up, right?
I don't think he'd make a good hitting coach because
Right.
I think he had a harsh side to him. Rocky was batting in his Coney Island batting cage, and of course the Clipper was saying, "Oh boy, you're awful. I mean, you're terrible."
But he's hitting every ball, and he's hitting them out pretty good for a layman, a doctor. I'm not putting it down, but he's not a player.
But the Clipper was basically saying, "No, I don't care." And meanwhile, this is a crowd is beginning to be on the other side of the chain link fence. And I was actually at this place. Now it's been closed for many years. But what basically happens then? Finally, Rocky got like a little snarky, a little negative. Say, "Listen, how about you come in here and you start batting balls a little bit?" So finally, the Clipper went inside, and he only took 10 balls, but he hit every one. And Rock noticed that his face shrank in concentration. He also noticed that he actually lost, it seemed, years of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And while he was playing, when he was batting these 10 robot balls, there was a setting sun behind him because this place would be facing west. And it was like classic. It's like someone could put that in stone. This is a guy who was then in his 80s trying to bat at these robot balls and actually doing it. And in the background was the sound of Coney Island. They had the scent of Coney Island. They had the Nathans a few blocks down. They had all the kids screaming and everything else. And it made a perfect ending to what he was all about.
Right. After having a couple of dogs at Nathan's too, by the way.
Yes, he liked his Nathan's fries and his Nathan's dog.
Yes.
And even told Rocky, he said, "Gee, because they were going by, he said, it'd be nice to get some Nathan's Franks. It'd be nice to get one of them drinks. It'd be nice to get one of them fries." And they happened to stop.
Imagine DiMaggio on your softball team, in his 50s and 60s, and seeing you up to play. I'm just saying, he's one of those players that, like a Babe Ruth too, was not such a good coach.
No, he wasn't.
Because they had the very good or tremendous talent, and was able to profess and teach how he hit to your brother, let's say, because he was telling your brother, move your foot, bend over this way, and he was just teaching not to your brother's skills, but he was teaching him how I do it as DiMaggio.
Exactly.
And that's not necessarily, especially batting, the best way to teach someone.
You're entirely right.
So I don't know he would have been a great coach, let's say.
No, I don't think so.
And again, it was a great way to I think your brother, tongue-in-cheek, it sounded like, said, I'm going to do this, and it just hits me. Let me see if I can get him in the cage anyway.
Yes.
It's sort of...
Yes, but he wasn't a good coach,
right?
In that sense,
and we do want to acknowledge that you're a good coach, a good discussion, a good presenter, if you will, of the legacy of Joe DiMaggio with Dinner with DiMaggio. It's not going to talk about baseball games and stats and so forth. It's going to talk to you about his later years, his reflection on life. It's great stories. There's plenty more stories than we just hit upon. Take a look at this book. It's available on Amazon and everywhere else. Again, Dinner with DiMaggio, Dr. Rock Positano. Am I pronouncing your name right?
That's correct.
And John Positano, of course, as forward by Francis Ford Coppola. There's comments there by Bob Costas and David Dinkins, Frank Langella, the Dracula himself, the original Dracula himself. And it just is some great stories in there and gives you an insight to this great ball player and why he carried such an aura with him. John, thank you for your time. We
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. It's the same for us. We'll be back, and everything old is new again next week to continue talking pop culture. Come on back.